Ferrari did not just complain about Mercedes. Ferrari may have just ripped away the hidden upgrade that helped protect Mercedes' championship lead. And the wildest part is, this entire fight started because Ferrari had already been forced to remove a similar idea from its own car before the season even began. So when Mercedes showed up with a serrated diffuser on the W16, Ferrari saw more than a clever aerodynamic trick. They saw a loophole. They saw unfinished business. And they saw a chance to turn their own winter punishment into a weapon. Now the governing body has stepped in, Mercedes could be forced to remove the part before Austria, and Toto Wolff is furious because this is not just about one upgrade. It is about trust, power, politics, and whether Ferrari just found the first real crack in Mercedes' dominance. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Ferrari's protest hit Mercedes so hard, you have to go back to the moment Ferrari realized this was not just a technical disagreement. It was a memory. A very uncomfortable one. Before the season even started, Ferrari had already walked into the same dangerous part of the rulebook. Their new car had a diffuser idea that looked clever, aggressive, and valuable. It lived underneath the rear of the car, in the place where clean airflow can turn into grip, and grip can turn into lap time. But during the winter checks, Ferrari were told to remove it. Not after a race. Not after a rival complained. Before the car had even begun its season properly, that idea was taken away. And that matters, because in Formula 1, losing a part before the season starts is not just a small inconvenience. It changes the plan. It changes the way engineers think. It can force the team to redesign around a missing piece, while every rival keeps moving forward. Ferrari had paid a price at the limit of the regulations. So when they later looked at the Mercedes W16 and saw a serrated diffuser extension, a jagged, sharp-edged concept working in the same sensitive area of the car, this was never going to be ignored. Because from Ferrari's side, the question was obvious. If our idea was too much, why is theirs allowed? That one question is what turned a hidden aerodynamic detail into a political bomb. The diffuser itself is not something most fans notice. It is not as dramatic as a front wing braking, or an engine smoking, or two drivers fighting wheel to wheel into the first corner. It sits low, at the back, almost invisible unless you know exactly where to look. But inside a Formula 1 team, that area is gold. The diffuser helps manage the air leaving from under the car. And when that air leaves smoothly, the car can feel more planted, more stable, more alive in the hands of the driver. Imagine running across a wet floor in old shoes, then suddenly changing into shoes that grip the ground properly. You might not look much different from the outside, but every step feels safer. You can push harder. You can turn sharper. You trust yourself more. That is what a good diffuser can help create. Trust. And trust is speed. So when Mercedes appeared with a serrated edge in that area, Ferrari did not just see a strange shape. They saw potential performance. They saw a possible advantage hiding in plain sight. And more importantly, they saw something that looked far too close to a door Ferrari had already been told was closed. This is where the story becomes dangerous. Because Ferrari were not accusing Mercedes from a place of ignorance. They had already been through the process. They already knew how painful that boundary could be. They already knew what it felt like when the governing body looked at a diffuser idea and said, no. That gave Ferrari a kind of knowledge that Mercedes could not simply dismiss. And it gave their protest emotional weight. Ferrari were not just saying, Mercedes found something clever. They were saying, Mercedes may be benefiting from the same kind of idea we were forced to abandon. That is a much more powerful accusation. Not because it proves Mercedes did anything illegal. The first response from the governing body suggested the Mercedes version was different enough to pass. Different shape. Different execution. Different details. But Formula 1 is built on details. A few millimeters can be the difference between legal and illegal. A small curve can change the argument. A tiny edge can decide whether a concept is genius or forbidden. And that is exactly why this fight became so intense. Ferrari were not asking the world to judge the part from a photo. They were forcing the governing body to explain the line. Not vaguely. Not emotionally. Precisely. Where is the limit? Why did Ferrari cross it? Why did Mercedes not cross it? And if the answer is hidden in geometry, then how close can anyone get before the rule book snaps shut? That is the question that made this bigger than one car. Because once the governing body is forced to answer, every team starts listening. Mercedes listen because their upgrade is under threat. Ferrari listen because they want consistency. McLaren, Red Bull, Aston Martin, and every other team listen because if that line moves, their own development ideas could be next. That is how one small piece at the back of a car becomes a paddock-wide warning. And for Mercedes, the timing could not have been worse. They were not chasing from the back. They were leading. They had momentum. They had built their season around control, consistency, and the belief that their technical direction was stronger than everyone else's. Then Ferrari arrived with a question that sounded simple, but carried a blade inside it. Why are they allowed to keep what we had to lose? That is the kind of question that does not disappear. It follows the team into meetings. It follows the governing body into decisions. It follows the journalists into the paddock. And eventually, it follows Mercedes straight into Austria, where one hidden upgrade suddenly becomes the center of the weekend. But the most important part is still coming. Because Ferrari did not only challenge Mercedes. Ferrari learned from the ruling, built its own legal version, and then used that knowledge to push the fight even further. But Ferrari's question did not land in an empty room. It landed in the middle of a season where Mercedes were already carrying the weight of being the team everyone wanted to catch. That changes everything. Because when a midfield team finds a clever part, the paddock notices, but the reaction is usually controlled. People study it. They copy it. They ask quiet questions. But when the championship leader finds a clever part, the same shape becomes a threat. And Mercedes were not just leading by accident. They had started the season with authority. Their car looked balanced, efficient, and mature before most rivals had even found stability. George Russell and Kimi Antonelli had given Mercedes the kind of results that make a garage feel untouchable. The points gap was not just numbers on a table. It was pressure on everyone else. Ferrari felt that pressure. So did McLaren. So did Red Bull. And when a team under pressure sees the leader using a detail that sits close to a regulatory boundary, the reaction becomes sharper. Because in Formula One, a dominant car does not need a huge illegal trick to become impossible to chase. Sometimes, it only needs one small legal advantage in the right place. A diffuser edge. A cleaner airflow path. A little more rear stability through the corners where the driver wants to attack, but the car usually asks for caution. That is why Ferrari's protest had so much force behind it. It was not just about whether Mercedes had found a few tenths. It was about whether Mercedes had found a protected advantage in an area Ferrari had already been denied. And that is where Loic Serra's role becomes important. Ferrari's technical group did not simply point at Mercedes and complain. They asked for clarification. They wanted the governing body to explain why the Mercedes version passed when Ferrari's earlier version had been removed. At first, the answer seemed to protect Mercedes. The governing body's position was that the Mercedes solution was technically compliant because it was not identical to Ferrari's banned winter design. Same broad concept, maybe. Same legal reality, no. And for Mercedes, that distinction was everything. Because Formula One engineering lives in distinctions. One curve is legal. Another curve is not. One mounting point is acceptable. Another one creates a problem. One interpretation is innovation. Another becomes a loophole. Mercedes could look at that first response and believe the matter was settled. They had spoken to the people who judged the rules. They had their explanation. They had their confidence. But Ferrari saw something else inside that answer. They saw information. That is the part that makes this story so dangerous. A clarification does not only tell you whether something is allowed. It tells you why. It reveals the shape of the boundary. It shows which details matter, which details can survive, and which details are too risky. Ferrari had lost an idea in winter, but now they were learning how to bring part of that idea back legally. And they moved fast. They developed their own version of the serrated diffuser concept, one that stayed on the right side of the line. Then they brought that thinking into a wider upgrade package. And when Lewis Hamilton won in Barcelona, Ferrari suddenly had something far more powerful than anger. They had proof. Proof that the car could respond. Proof that the development path was alive. Proof that Mercedes could be pressured on track and off it. That win changed the emotional temperature at Ferrari. Before Barcelona, the diffuser argument could have looked like frustration from a team chasing the leader. After Barcelona, it looked like Ferrari had found momentum. They were not only asking questions because they were behind. They were asking questions because they believed they were close enough for every detail to matter. And that is when the fight took a darker turn. Because Ferrari did not stop at building its own legal solution. They kept pushing the governing body about the limits of the aerodynamic area. The correspondence continued. The questions continued. The pressure continued. And eventually, the governing body's position appeared to shift from explanation to action. Reports said teams had been instructed to remove the serrated diffuser extensions, with the Austrian Grand Prix becoming the possible enforcement deadline. That is the moment Mercedes would have felt the ground move. Because there is a massive difference between being told, your part is legal, and being told, the rules have now been clarified in a way that means you cannot keep running it like this. One is reassurance. The other is disruption. And disruption, in the middle of a title fight, is almost never accidental. Mercedes would not only be thinking about the carbon fiber piece itself. They would be thinking about the work behind it. The simulations. The wind tunnel time. The setup balance. The driver feedback. The race plans built around a car that behaves in a very specific way. Remove that piece, and the question becomes immediate. What else changes? Does the rear feel weaker? Does the car slide more? Do the tires get punished sooner? Does the team need to carry more wing and lose speed on the straights? Does the driver lose the confidence to attack the same way? That is why Toto Wolff's anger makes sense. Because from his side, Ferrari had not simply exposed a questionable part. Ferrari had taken a regulatory conversation and turned it into a competitive strike. Mercedes had followed a process, received assurances, and built performance around a solution that was later pulled into doubt. And when a team principal sees that happen, he does not only think about fairness. He thinks about control. Mercedes had control of the championship picture. Ferrari challenged control of the rule interpretation. And once that control starts slipping, even slightly, the whole season feels less secure. But here is the twist. Ferrari were walking a dangerous line too. Because the more they pushed the governing body to tighten the interpretation, the more they risked limiting their own freedom. Their own legal version of the concept had to survive the same scrutiny. Their future upgrades had to live under the same stricter light. That means Ferrari were not just throwing stones from a safe distance. They were gambling. They were betting that their understanding of the boundary was now better than Mercedes. They were betting that the version they had built could survive while the Mercedes implementation could not. They were betting that the political damage to Mercedes would be worth the regulatory attention placed on the entire diffuser area. That is not panic. That is calculation. And in Formula One, calculation is often more frightening than aggression. Because aggression can fade, calculation stays. By the time the Austrian Grand Prix story began to form, the serrated diffuser was no longer just a technical part. It had become a symbol. For Ferrari, it symbolized unfinished business from winter. For Mercedes, it symbolized innovation being challenged after approval. For the governing body, it symbolized the impossible job of keeping new regulations under control while the smartest engineers in the world try to bend every sentence. And for the rest of the grid, it symbolized a warning. Do not assume a legal part will stay safe forever. Because if a rival can build a strong enough case, and if the governing body decides the spirit of the rules is being threatened, the line can move. That is what makes Austria feel so tense. The cars may roll out onto the track looking almost the same to most viewers. Same colors. Same drivers. Same helmets. Same sponsors. But underneath, the balance may have changed. The politics certainly have. And Mercedes now have to answer a question that no championship leader wants to face. Are they still faster because their car is fundamentally stronger, or because they were carrying a detail Ferrari just managed to take away? The answer will not come from a press release. It will come from the lap times, from the tire wear, from the way Russell and Antonelli talk about the rear of the car, from the way Wolff reacts if Ferrari suddenly look closer than they should. And if that happens, Ferrari's protest will have done more than remove a part. It will have planted doubt inside the most powerful garage of the season. But even that is only half the story. Because while Mercedes were trying to protect the diffuser, Ferrari were preparing another weapon for Austria, one that had nothing to do with the floor, and everything to do with the engine deficit they had been fighting since the start of the year.